governments, but victorious tribes and kingdoms in the course of conflict within the continent itself, overwhelming other neighboring populations and selling them into slavery to European and other slave traders, Arab slave traders in the east coast of Africa, European slave traders in the west coast of Africa, for the benefit of their own domestic politics within Africa itself. It is a mistake to assume that all perpetrators of the slave trade had white skins, just as it is a mistake to assume that all people with white skins in America today in some way are the heirs or the beneficiaries of the practice of the slave trade and slavery and discrimination in this country by white people in years gone by. I mean, consider the case of recent immigrants to this country, people who've come to this country in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years with white skins, or what appear to be white skins in the case of Hispanics, for example. Are they to be burdened by discrimination today? Are they to be put to the back of the bus in employment or education because other people with white skins 50, 100, 300 years ago created and perpetuated slavery? By the same token, thank you, are people with dark skins today to be benefited by affirmative action, sent to the front of the bus, the head of the line, without regard to their own individual merits, simply because they share the skin color of people who were victimized in bygone times? The very heart of the idea of equality, of equal protection of the law that's built into the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution is that we judge people as individuals. We don't judge people by classes. The law is not meant to protect classes, it's meant to protect individuals. That's our Constitution, and that's what the dream of Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin, who was the organizer of that march 47 years ago, along with A. Philip Randolph and others working with Dr. King, that was what they were aiming for. An American legal system that was true to the founding ideals of this country as embedded in the American Declaration of Independence, where we held that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we strip that away from individuals and say that those are class entitlements, those are class rights, then I respectfully submit that, in disagreement with Mr. John, that we are being untrue to the founding of our civilization, to the founding principles of our republic, and to the dream that Dr. King articulated on the Mall those 47 years ago, this last Saturday. So I respectfully urge you to reject the proposition that affirmative action is justified today. Affirmative action may have been justified at a time when slavery was fresh and the immediate victims of slavery or discrimination were alive and among us and were burdened, bore personally, individually, the burdens of the crimes that had been visited upon them. But as time goes by, now we are 47 years on from the enactment of the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Acts of the early 1960s, in the middle of the 20th century. There must come a statute of limitations, as it were. There must come a time when we can say we've hit some reset button and we can achieve the dream of judging people as individuals and not simply as people who are nothing more than the color of the skin they bear. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in today. Thank John Marshall Law School. Before I get started, my name is Anthony Anderson. I'm a conservative activist, independent, of course. And, I'll start by saying this. The title of my argument will be this: Affirmative Action, Racial Preferences in Black and White. The thesis is this: while most conservatives believe opportunities in this country are equally accessible by all, the reality is that the ideals of equality and equal opportunity still elude us, some 47 years after the debate began. As you can see today, Mr. Morris has said on several occasions in years gone by, as if racism is no longer in our society or part of our American culture. He has also said things about race. Race has always been a factor in terms of opportunities in this country. They want to say all men are created equally. When we read that, when we start that, we know today, even today, that some people still believe, especially in the Republican Party, that you can be with us, but you can't be near us. He wants to say that we're not immediate victims. Of course we're immediate victims. These are people who were once our ancestors. And of course, you don't start from 0 and get to 100. Just as Patrick said, slavery ran from 1619 to 1964 before we can get any laws set into place to right the wrongs that were happening in the past. And he said, it's time to hit the reset button. Are you serious? We haven't even started the race. What do we hit the reset button for? What do we hit the reset button for? Some conservatives say people of color are taking college admission slots from more qualified whites. Well, the fact of the matter is this. Most blacks and whites who apply for colleges or universities around this country get in, for the most part. It's only at the top tier schools where you see minority underrepresentation, and that is when affirmative action comes into place. When there is in the law school, for instance, when there's medical school, for instance, that is when affirmative action comes into place at the top tier schools in this country. A study at the UCLA Academic Advisor Program aimed at students who are somewhat less prepared found that percentages of students of color admitted through so-called special admissions were roughly identical to the percentages of white accepted through the same special admissions program. According to a report by the General Accounting Office in 1984, only 1% of all undergraduate scholarships money came from scholarships that are restricted to people of color only. And even those are privately funded. Okay? Stigmatisms. Of course, we like to bring this up also. Individuals such as Shelby Steele, John McWhorter, who are notable conservatives who argue that because blacks receive a hand-up policy, they are seen as less capable than others. Therefore, they are needing some sort of special dispensation. By more than a 6-to-1 margin over those seeking to scale it back or end it, indeed, in terms of affirmative action, were bad idea for by more than a 6-to-1 margin over those seeking to scale it back or end it, and we're talking about affirmative action at this point, most blacks thought that it was good for us to have affirmative action by a 6-to-1 margin. Are we that idiotic to think that we don't know what's best for us as a people? Also, there's persistent cultural defects. The Bell Curve by Charles Murray and Richard Harrison published a book in which they stated blacks were inferior. At the same time, these same people were invited to a conservative congressional delegation right after the 1994 landslide of Republicans in Congress. What about the stigma that most surely attached to children of alumni who receive a substantial preference in college admissions to this day? Is there a stigma associated with that? Or is it just preference, modern day style? What about the self-image of children from wealthy families who inherit their parents' fortunes? Is that also a stigma? Or is that just a hand up, like most affirmative action programs are? And why is there no concern for those who have always received racial preferences? There's always been racial preferences in this country in terms of affirmative action. That's all.
Good afternoon. I want to read a statement here. I'm not going to try to answer some of these. Actually, I'd like to try and answer some of these in some of the questions, hopefully, that you ask. I'm going to give some historical background here that will help us put affirmative action. And I think a lot of what's being talked about here is actually reparations, not necessarily affirmative action. But I will deal with affirmative action here in what I say. Over a month ago, we celebrated the birth of our nation, commemorating our Declaration of Independence from Great Britain, July 4th, 1776. These words were penned. When in the course of human history, or human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and assume among the powers of the earth and the separate and equal station which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that we share the causes which impel them to separate. In other words, we dissolve these political ties with you, Great Britain, and we will also tell you why. We will declare the causes which impelled them, or us, to the separation. We will express our grievances, which you have ignored. Now, this has application, and I'll show you in the end to what we're talking about. 11 years later, and after defeating the British, our Constitution was written and became the supreme law of the land. Thus, we had thrown off the oppression from a foreign country, but now had to face oppression from within our borders. Shortly after the defeat of the British, the northern states began to free their slaves, while the southern states looked to expand slavery. A great debate swept across our nation over the institution of slavery and the place of former slaves in American society. In 1827, a black man by the name of John B. Russwurm started the first African-American newspaper called Freedom's Journal. He was later joined by Samuel Cornish as they covered the national and international news and events in the black community, which no one else would cover. They had a problem with the mainstream media as well. And they said this: "We wish to plead our cause. For too long have others spoken for us. For too long has the public been deceived by misrepresentations in things which concern us dearly. The plight of the African American has been a political football ever since we first set foot on American soil. No one person or organization can speak for a group of people as diverse as we are. Hence, the debate or fight for emancipation continues today. But let it be known that the struggle for equality did not begin in the 1950s and 60s. It began in the 1850s, probably even before that. Abolitionists began the Republican Party to stop the slave trade in 1854. Their platform was anti-slavery. The election of Lincoln as a president in 1860 led to the Civil War of 1861. We fought a war because we believed that no man had a right to own another. In 1863, slaves in the southern states were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, and as I said before, slaves in the northern states were already being freed by individual states. And by 1870, 43 years after Freedom's Journal newspaper, a number of African Americans, some former slaves, were serving in the U.S. Congress and state legislatures across the South. Now, besides the voice of the black press, represented by Freedom's Journal newspaper, other voices could be heard proclaiming liberty and conservative principles and values espoused by our founding fathers. One of the first black conservatives said, "Our destiny is largely in our own hands. If we find, we shall have to seek. If we succeed in the race of life, it must be by our own energies and by our own exertions. Others may clear the road, but we must go forward or be left behind in the race of life." He also warned against relying on others, but to become self-sufficient when he said, "If we remain poor and dependent, the riches of other men will not avail us. If we are ignorant, the intelligence of other men will do but little for us. If we are foolish, the wisdom of other men will not guide us. If we are wasteful of time and money, the economy of other men would only make our destitution the more disgraceful and hurtful." These words of Frederick Douglass hold as much meaning today as they did when he first proclaimed them to newly freed slaves. Unfortunately, many today have not taken the sentiment to heart. They have become dependent on the riches of others and have left their destiny in the hands of bureaucracy. They will never know true freedom because they have gone from one master to another. It is freedom from big government that will grant us the opportunity to succeed in the race of life through our own blood, sweat, and tears. Affirmative action is a tool of big government to try to guarantee not opportunity, but results, and it is flawed in its concept and application. Douglass himself addressed the idea of some form of affirmative action in a speech called What the Black Man Wants. When asked what should be done with the Negro, he replied, now this is a long quote, I had but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us, for your doing with us has already paid mischief with us. Do nothing with us. If the apple will not remain on the tree of its own strength, if they are worm-eaten to the core, if they are easily ripe and disposed to fall, let them fall. I am not for tying or fastening them to the tree in any way, except by nature's plan. And if they will not stay there, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him fall also. All I ask is to give him a chance to stand on his own legs. Let him alone. If you see him on the way to school, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going to dinner, to the dinner table at a hotel, let him go. If you see him going to the ballot box, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going to the workshop, just let him alone. Your interference is doing him a positive injury. General Banks' preparation is of the piece with this attempt to prop up the Negro. Let him fall if he cannot stand alone. If the Negro cannot live by the line of eternal justice, so beautifully pictured by you in the illustration by Mr. Phillips, the fault will not be yours. It will be he who made the Negro, meaning God, and establish that line for his government. Let him live or die. But if only you untie his hands and give him a chance, I think he will live. He will work as readily for himself as a white man. A great many delusions have been swept away by this war. One was that the Negro would not work. He has proved his ability to work. Another was that the Negro would not fight, that he would be possessed by what is the sheepish attitudes of humility, as a perfect lamb and an Uncle Tom, disposed to take off his coat whenever required, fold his hands, and be whipped by anyone who wanted to whip him. But the war has proved that there is a great deal of human nature in the Negro, and he will fight. As Mr. Quincy, our president, said in earlier days, the knees. And there's a reasonable possibility of his whipping anybody. Did you know that some of the greatest achievements took place before there was any affirmative action? We look at the black press, we look at Harlem Renaissance, we look at the Negro Leagues, we look at Black Wall Street, we look at the first black millionaire came before there was ever any affirmative action. I have a list here. I have 13 pages of things that took place before there was ever any affirmative action. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't need the government to give us a hand to do something. We're able to do it for ourselves. And the past history has shown, despite the odds, we have been able to make it. According to Thomas Sowell, he says, many may claim that there would be no blacks in our leading academic institution without affirmative action. Let's check the facts. Black man graduated from Harvard 100 years before there was affirmative action. The first black man to receive a PhD from Harvard did so over 100 years ago. The first black woman graduated from Oberlin in 1862. Blacks were attending Hinsdale before the Civil War, even though Hinsdale has opposed affirmative action to this very day. Most blacks, of course, I'll finish this point. Most blacks were of no course in a position to achieve these things like this because they did not have the opportunity to get a decent education. We say that school choice will open the door for us to have the opportunity to take advantage of opportunities that come our way. I had a little bit more for you, but I've run out of time, so thank you.
Thank you. We've heard four very persuasive speakers, each giving their positions for and against affirmative action. Before we go any further, though, I would like to introduce someone who has just come into the room who organized this, and that is Dean Rory Smith. Dean Smith, would you like to say a few words?